Duly noted. Minuto 35 na legislature in Guam is back from recess. When we last left, the motion by Senator Moylan was withdrawn. Anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? Vice Speaker Nelson, you're recognized on the main motion.
Seatus Masi, Madam Speaker, I would just like to rise in support of this measure. It's very critical to have a sense of transparency during this time. When there's a lack of transparency, there's a lot of questions, and also people assume that because there's no transparency that you cannot trust the information being given on the forefront. And so, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the good sponsor for this bill, especially when we're focusing on implementations of rules for unemployment, paying out tax refunds, and just understanding the actions being taken by the executive branch and how we move forward from here. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Vice Speaker. Anyone else on the main motion, please? Senator Regine Biscoli, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to pose a question to the author of this measure, if she would yield. I do want to rise in support of this bill, but I just have a question in terms of the legislative intent of this measure. And I guess I just wanted to bring up a previous judgment that was reached, I believe in the 1970s, in a case, it's Wong v. Kamina. And I just wanted to know if in Section 6 of the measure that's before us, Madam Speaker, if this ruling was contemplated. So Section 6, just for my colleagues, notwithstanding any other provision of law, any funds that may be subject to legislative authorization or appropriation for expenditure pursuant to Section 5001, Title 5 of Public Law 116-136 shall not be expended, earmarked, or set aside without a legislative appropriation and are not subject to transfer by the governor. And so I just wanted to ask the author of this bill if Wong v. Kamina was contemplated, or if that decision had any bearing in terms of the legislative intent of this measure specific to Section 6.
Senator Therese, would you like to yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker. And I welcome the question. I actually have contemplated that because, as I said earlier in my description of the bill, we have an entire chapter in the Guam Code that describes how all federal funds are subject to appropriation by the legislature. And several provisions in that chapter describe why, how, and they very much try to control federal funds. In Section 22301, there is a comment by the compiler that refers to the Wong case and describes that Congress can make appropriations directly to the government of Guam, where these appropriations or grants completely fund a specific purpose without the need of local funding, and where the appropriations or grant does not provide for local legislative control, there's no authority. So that's why I said earlier, Madam Speaker, it depends on how the funds are given. And for example, right now we are waiting to see how the funds are given in most instances. And so that's why, yes, we are contemplating, and I said, if we are able, then I think that the legislature should preserve that prerogative. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Chulai. Senator Lee, does that answer your inquiry?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the retiring speaker for her response. I just want to complete the section that had been cited previously. Where these appropriations or grants completely fund a specific purpose without the need of local funding, and in this example, we can, take into consideration the CARES Act, and where the appropriation or grant does not provide for local legislative control, there is no authority for the Guam Legislature to assume the responsibility for reappropriating these funds. And so, Madam Speaker, I think that's pretty clear, and I just want to be sure that as we move forward with the consideration for this bill, and again, I support this measure, but Section 6 in and itself needs to be, I think, looked at a little bit more thoroughly as it relates to this existing judgment. And thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Lee. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Vice Speaker, can you take the podium a minute, please?
Speaker Barnes, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker. I do have a question for the author, if I may.
Senator Terlahi.
This bill on Section A8 allows the public auditor to conduct audits, and part of the federal packages allow for stimulus payments to residents. And if the Office of Public Accountability is to audit these payments and the eligibility of recipients who receive these stimulus payments, it's been noted that the OPA cannot access individual tax returns and revenue and taxation per the federal statute could refuse auditors the ability to verify and review tax returns for 2018. So given that stimulus payments are the biggest chunk of the federal aid, is there any way we can further do accountability? And I'm hoping that she could help me answer that inquiry.
Senator Terlahi, do you yield?
I do, but could the speaker just repeat the question?
Sure.
I'm not sure I understand exactly.
Sure. The bill allows for the public auditor to conduct audits, and part of the federal packages allows for the stimulus payments to the residents that qualify. If the OPA is to audit these payments and the eligibility of recipients who receive these stimulus payments, the OPA cannot access individual tax returns. Per the federal statute, revenue tax could refuse the auditor's ability to verify and review tax returns for 2018. And given the stimulus payments are the biggest chunk of the federal aid, is there any way we can further the accountability? So I'm trying to make sure that the accountability is there, knowing that the OPA, based on the Privacy Act, that the OPA, how can the OPA facilitate this moving forward?
Senator Terlahi, do you yield?
Sure, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question from our speaker. It's been a long-going kind of battle between auditors and revenue and taxation as to access to taxpayer information. So as it stands now, they are not allowed access to taxpayer-specific information. So the speaker's correct. I doubt that the auditor is going to be able to audit, who got what as far as taxpayers. However, they will be able to audit whether they were issued in checks of, $1,200 versus whatever other amounts they might have been issued in. And if any part of that money was spent outside of paying taxpayers and paying, other, for programming or other things, and in accordance with whatever memorandums we might see. So I think that would be their parameters to compare whether the parameters in the memorandums or whatever, whether they approve. For example, our Director of Revenue and Taxation's already submitted her request for approval. If they approve that, that would lay out exactly the parameters. I think more it's the program management side of those funds versus, taxpayer identities that I would hope the auditor would concentrate on.
Speaker Barnes.
Madam Speaker, and I just want to thank the author of this legislation and the efforts of moving and facilitating this forward. I do support the intent of this bill for accountability and transparency, and I just wanted to make sure that if the OPA is afforded that opportunity and the provisions of Section 8, that again, the outlook for that is seeing how that can be accessed. So I just want to say thank you for that, and I just wanted that to be noted on the record, and I appreciate you giving me the time to ask the inquiry.
Thank you, Speaker Barnes. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the main motion? Senator Terlahi, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their comments and especially the questions on the bill. And I realize that the bill primarily, it's intended to facilitate these programs. These are brand new programs, not existing in our government at this time. The bill is intended to remove whatever barriers there might be to implementing these swiftly. It's also intended, as a previous speaker said, to accommodate transparency and, of course, accountability. And I understand that federal programs have accountability built into them, hopefully, and it's just to assist that and to ensure that the legislature receives, reports as necessary. Some of these we might find will allow us to further adjust our budgets, further accommodate these programs within our services provided by these agencies, which we have oversight of. And I know that the governors, joined together to lobby very heavily that they would be in control of these federal funds. And so it might end up that they do have primarily control of these federal funds. And I don't think there's anything in this bill that impedes that. I think, as one of the previous speakers from Santa Rita said, this is, the details will be spelled out, hopefully, in these memorandums, and we will at least be able to see what kind of arrangement they made for Guam promptly, and that we will then be able to ensure that it's being carried out that way. Everybody is interested in the same thing. It's just to get that aid out to the people that it's supposed to go to as quickly as possible. So by this bill, we remove some of the AAA, we remove whatever local statutes might be conflicting with the federal aid packages, hopefully. And so I'm hoping that it's going to facilitate, Madam Speaker. I think with our revenues being drastically reduced based on this crisis, we will have this federal stimulus is going to play a huge, huge part in fiscal year 2020. I mean, for sure. it can't be denied, Madam Speaker, that all of our fiscal year 2020 budgeting has pretty much been, dismissed at this point, and we're going to have to start from scratch. So we need to know as much as we can about every single dime that is going to be spent under these programs. With that said, again, I thank my colleagues for their support. I hope that they will support this bill. And I would like to just move, Madam Speaker, if I could add Senator Nelson, the Vice Speaker Nelson, Senator Josan Augustine, Senator Mary Torres, and all other senators as sponsor.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing or seeing none? Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to move the bill to the third reading as a substitute.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing none? Motion carries. Thank you, Senator Therese. Colleagues, next on the agenda is Bill 324-35 COR. Senator Mary Torres, I will recognize you at this time.
Jesus Maasi, I move to place into the third reading file Bill number 324-35 COR, introduced by myself and Senator Regine Biscoe-Lee, which is an act to suspend the 2% general fund deposit requirement as mandated by Section 22904, Article 9, Chapter 22 of Title 5 Guam Code Annotated for fiscal year 2020. And I wish to speak on the measure further.
On that motion, please proceed.
Madam Speaker, the intent behind Bill number 324 is rather straightforward. It suspends the government of Guam's requirement to deposit monies into the rainy day fund for fiscal year 2020, granting the governor greater flexibility during this public health emergency. As my colleagues are aware, the economic impact of the 2019 novel coronavirus will inevitably result in a decline in revenues collected for the general fund. This will likely inhibit the government of Guam's ability to meet its adopted revenue levels for fiscal year 2020. That said, it is still a requirement under Guam law that 2% of the total revenues projected for the general fund be deposited into the rainy day fund for each fiscal year. Moreover, under this section, once monies are deposited into the rainy day fund, it would still take legislative authority for the governor to expend the money from the fund, even in cases of emergency. Madam Speaker, I think we can all agree that we are in the midst of an uncertain time with no clear idea of the extent and duration of this pandemic. And given these circumstances, I believe suspending this requirement will give our governor the flexibility she needs and allow her to instead direct those revenues towards Guam's current crisis in the event actual revenues are collected. So I ask my colleagues to please join me and my co-sponsor in support of this important measure at this time. Jesus Maasi.
Buen provecho, Senator Torres. Anyone else on the main motion?
Before I proceed, may I I would like to make a motion, and I believe it was uploaded by the clerks, to add a new section 3 to read, "Nothing herein shall prevent Imagahagan Guahan from making such deposits into the rainy day fund as she deems fit." So in other words, Madam Speaker, if the governor desires to deposit because circumstances warrant, then that will be her prerogative. But as a first course, we will, suspend the requirement.
On that motion, is there anyone wishing to speak on it? If Senator Josan Augustine, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I rise in support of the bill. The author it's just perfect to just suspend the rainy day fund so we can take care of whatever emergencies and And if there's a desire to spend the money that they send the request to us, and we appropriate the funds accordingly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Teresa Lai, you are recognized.
On the amendment or the bill?
On the
Oh,
amendment.
sorry, that's okay.
No. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Are there any objections? No, hearing or seeing no objections, motion carries. On the main motion, Senator Teresa, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand in support of this bill. It would allow the governor to spend any monies in the rainy day fund. And as we know, it was only this fiscal year, Madam Speaker, where the governor actually requested that the legislature amend the law that was requiring a 2% deposit, or 2% set aside for deficit reduction, and instead put that into a rainy day fund. And as you know, we had Director Byrne from the Department of Administration here recently, maybe a month ago, and he stated for us that although our revenue projections were looking well prior to this crisis, of course, that there were no deposits yet into that rainy day fund. But I appreciate the flexibility that we are giving the governor here again, Madam Speaker, and I think with the amendment, it's even better that it will allow her to use any money that might go to the rainy day fund or continue to deposit into the rainy day fund. So I'd like to thank the sponsors. Madam Speaker.
Went back to Senator Terlai. Anyone else on the main motion? Anyone else? Minority Leader, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too rise in support of this amendment. It was actually on March 11th when we had Director Burns in here to discuss the stimulus fund bill. And through the Committee of the Whole, it was brought to our attention, like the previous speaker, good speaker had mentioned, that nothing has been deposited up to this time. Expecting $13.2 million, I don't think we're going to be able to expect that kind of money right now. And I mean, even now, before the crisis happened, they weren't even able to put any money in there, and that was already the first quarter. If I'm not mistaken, I think the first quarter should have been so far about $5.2 million that went into this rainy day fund. So it's obvious, even before the crisis, we have an issue. So you can imagine now what it's going to be like now for the finances of this government of Guam. So I appreciate this amendment. This legislation. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity.
You're very welcome, Minority Leader. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, do you want to speak? Senator Torres, you may close.
I want to express my to everybody for their support of this bill, and as a good sense measure, I'd like to make a motion to add all of my colleagues to the bill as co-sponsors.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing or seeing none? Motion carries. Senator Torres?
Nothing further, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Oh, and I move that we place this on the voting file, third reading voting file.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none? Motion carries.
Madam Speaker.
Vice Speaker, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I believe that we have Bill number 326-35 as part of the session agenda, so I'd like to move to add Bill 326-35 into the third reading. I'd like to make an amendment.
On that motion, Without any objection, please proceed, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, if I'd like to make an amendment to Bill 326-35. It should be on those forwarded to the clerks. And it's a very simple amendment. It's on line 3 to 7, page 4. And what we're doing here is on line 3, we are crossing out the word not. And on line 4, we are crossing out the word not. And then at the end of the paragraph, we are including COVID-19 hazardous pay shall be calculated and paid based on the regular rate of the employee.
On that amendment by Vice Speaker Nelson, are there anyone wishing to speak on the amendment? Minority Leader, you are recognized.
Sujus Masli, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, are we did we go into motions to bring the bill back from the
No.
voting file?
No, Minority Leader, these bills were put down at the bottom of the agenda. We are now at that. We are back to the bill number 326, and that's where we're at right now. Do you wish to speak on that? On the amendment as proffered by Vice Speaker Senator Perez, I will recognize you at this time on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just don't see the amendment. If I could just have a quick recess to find it.
We'll take a moment's recess. Y mina 35 na legislatura en Guam is back from recess. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? The Vice Speaker's amendment. Senator Sabina Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If I could just have the author of the amendment give the rationale for the amendment.
So you're asking,
Yes, it's a point of inquiry.
Vice Speaker, would you like to yield to that question?
Madam Speaker, it's very clear in the amendment. It's very clear in the amendment, the rationale.
Thank you. Senator Perez, you still have the floor.
Can she restate? So I guess the issue is hazard pay, and is there double time in this as well?
I'm sorry, Senator Perez.
Yeah, another point of a follow-up question for the author of the amendment
State your question.
is double time by proffering this amendment, is double time also included with the hazard pay?
Vice Speaker, would you like to yield to that? The question is, will double time be included in this measure?
Let me read the amendment, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding any provision of law, rule, or regulation, or executive order, the provisions of the Department of Administration Personnel Rules and Regulations 8.406 authorizing payment at double the regular rate of pay shall apply in addition to the COVID-19 public health emergency and shall be extended to employees eligible for COVID-19 hazardous pay. COVID-19 hazardous pay shall be calculated based on the regular rate of the employee.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Perez, you still have the floor. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Also, a follow-up question.
Please state your question.
What is the economic impact of this?
I-
What is the economic impact of this amendment?
What is the
The economic impact.
Vice Speaker? Would you like to yield to that question at this time?
Madam Speaker, in consultation with FEMA Public Assistant Labor Cost Reimbursements, in reference to FEMA Public Assistance Labor Cost Reimbursements, reimbursement of double the regular rate of premium pay is reimbursable through FEMA. Pay at double the regular rate in accordance with 8.406 natural disasters and other emergency conditions, Section C.2 of the Department of Administration Personnel Rules and Regulations is reimbursable because the written policy was established before the disaster and it meets the following criteria. Does not include a contingency clause that payment is subject to federal funding, is applied uniformly regardless of a presidential declaration, and has set non-discretionary criteria for when the applicant activates various pay types. And so, Madam Speaker, the economic impact is what we have to come up with when we submit our packet to FEMA. We don't know how many personnel are getting it. It can change as this evolves. We know that the apex is coming in June, so we don't know what kind of strain it's going to put on our people or the economy or community, but we do know that it is reimbursable.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Perez, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to wish to speak on the amendment? Is there anyone else? Senator Therese, you are recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment changes the bill from what we had discussed the last time we were here in session. And so at that time, we had established, consistent with the governor, those 3 categories of pay specifically for COVID-19. And it was my understanding that was supposed to be the pay for personnel, and they were different categories because of the risk that these employees were facing. So this amendment would go back to, I think, the rules for typhoons, where they would get double pay and apply that double pay to this emergency as well. But it also adds the category pay on top of that double pay. And
Madam Speaker, I believe we are on the amendment.
Yes.
I do have another amendment that may touch light in what was referenced just 10 seconds
Thank you.
ago.
I'll take that as a point of information, Vice Speaker.
yes,
Thank you very much.
please. Otherwise, I
Senator-
have the floor, right, Madam
Yes,
Speaker?
yes, you
Thank
do.
you.
I have
The amendment is doing what I'm describing, and so that's why I'm trying to get my head around it, Madam Speaker, because I don't know, it clearly was not what was, I don't want to, I can't, know what's in the governor's mind, but it definitely was not what she requested. She requested that we take her category pay and we make it retroactive. That's what she asked the legislature to do. And but if we're adding category pay on top of double pay, I guess I'm confused, and I would just like to ask, if the double pay is reimbursable by FEMA, is the COVID-19 category pay, hazardous pay, as they've described it in this bill, is that also reimbursable by FEMA?
Thank you, Senator Chalayi. Vice Speaker, would you like to yield?
Madam Speaker, I know at this time for certain that double time pay is reimbursable
Thank
through FEMA.
Thank you.
The double time, but do we know the COVID-19 pay?
Madam Speaker, the original bill focuses on 10% hazardous pay, and the intent of that hazardous pay was to go towards the frontline personnel who do not receive hazardous pay, which was the CQA, Customs and Quarantine, DOE teachers who are responding to this crisis, our firefighters. That was the intent. Then an executive order came along with these categories. And so to align ourselves to ensure that the people that are responding to our coronavirus get paid what the governor promised them, we included those categories in the bill. Now, the governor, the executive branch, is tracking all the money. I don't know if the hazardous pay is reimbursable, and I don't know the impact of this category 25, 15, and 10%. But this is to align ourselves with the executive order to ensure that what the governor said, it is fulfilled.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Therese, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So my understanding of double pay is that for prior emergencies, when an employee actually has to show up to work, is called to work after an emergency or during an emergency, then they're entitled, according to the personnel rules, to double pay. I don't have that in front of me, and if the author of the amendment does, I would just like the citation so I could read it for myself, but it's my understanding they're entitled to double pay during those circumstances. However, as you know, we have employees, I don't know, it's just a different situation, because I think double pay is going to be much higher than the incentive pay that the governor had lined up, the 10, 15, and 25. And so, of course, everybody would want double pay, but this amendment is going to add the 10, 15, and 25 on top of even the double pay. And I guess
That is a possibility, Madam Speaker.
I'll take that as a point of information, Vice Speaker.
I'm trying to find out from the hospital whether nurses get double pay. According to the director, she said not that she knows. And so it was my understanding, and otherwise, of course, I don't really have an objection to it, except that I don't want to end up with another disparity that was not intended. For example, if nurses are not entitled to double pay, and they are the number one front line that we were intending to give the highest category, those nurses working at the hospital, they might end up getting only this 25% and not any double pay, and then And then it just, I guess that's my only concern. I mean, otherwise it's great to give out money, but I'm concerned that we're going to end up with a disparity that we are not intending. That's my concern, Madam Speaker. This is my first time to hear this, so I guess I'll leave it at that, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Chaloy. Anyone else on the amendment? Anyone else on the amendment?
Madam Speaker, just a point of inquiry for the retiring speaker.
I will go ahead and entertain you, Vice Speaker.
I did not
Yes.
pose any inquiry, Madam Speaker.
Yes, I
A point of
understand that.
inquiry from me
So,
to the retiring speaker.
Madam Vice Speaker, please, I will go ahead and entertain those who wish to speak on the amendment. If not on closing, I can go ahead and have you work the closing. If anybody else wanting to speak on this? Vice Speaker, you may close on your amendment. Okay. If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Vice Speaker, on the main bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just one last amendment that was given to us by legal to ensure that there's no conflict with the amendment that was proffered. Okay, colleagues, if you can pull it up, it's on line 21, page 2, and that reads, notwithstanding any provision of law, rule, or regulation, or executive order, in no event shall any employee be entitled to multiple hazardous differential rates of pay for the same period. In the event the employee is entitled to varying types or amounts of hazardous differential pay, the highest authorized differential rate shall be used.
For those who are trying to look for the document, it is FA B326 TCN L21P2.
And so, Madam Speaker, from my understanding, there was a concern that we issue, since the police perhaps receive 10% hazardous pay, on top of this bill, they would receive another 10%, if that was their category. However, the intent of the bill was to get hazardous pay out to those who were not receiving hazardous pay. And then the executive order came into place to increase hazardous pay by categories. And so, just to make sure that, there's continuity, we continue to move forward to ensure that you will receive the greater rate of pay whichever category you fall under. So if you fall under Category 1 and you're currently receiving 10% hazardous pay, you will get 25% hazardous pay. If you fall under Category 1 and you're already receiving 10% hazardous pay, you will get 25%. You will not get 35%, if that is clear. Okay.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? Anyone wishing to speak on the amendment? If not, are there any objections? Are there any objections? Senator Marsh, do you have an inquiry?
Seduis Masi. Several of us are still looking for the amendment, just so that we're clear.
I can barely hear you, Sen.
Several of us are still looking for the amendment. We just want to be able to see it before making the final decision.
Again, it is FA B326 TCN L21P2.
Madam Speaker,
Senator Mary Torres on the amendment.
while we are waiting, I just want to speak in support of this amendment, and I think that this is the sort of measure that makes it absolutely clear that there's no way that someone can manipulate and take advantage of multiple tiers of hazardous differential pay rates, and that only one will be used, which is the highest authorized differential rate that is provided for them. So I just want to rise in support. I think that when we're going through this sometimes convoluted types of tiers, it's important to have that underlying statement that only one shall prevail and not a mix of different things. So I just rise in support. Just want to make that point.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Anyone else on the amendment? Are there any objections? Senator, there's an objection, or would you like to speak? Yeah, I will recognize you, Senator Therese, on the amendment.
I support this amendment. This amendment limits the multiple hazardous differential rates, right? And you can only pick one, I guess, for the new one or the old one. And so that would be good, because then those who are not currently entitled to hazardous would be getting hazardous. I just, I think this has no impact on any other types of pay you might be getting, night differential or any, and obviously the double pay. And so I support this amendment, but I just don't think it takes care of still that double pay for some and not all of the employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Chalabi. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Are there any objections? Hearing or seeing none, motion carries. And anyone, I apologize, Vice Speaker, on the motion to, Minority Leader, did you want to speak on the main motion, on the motion as amended?
Actually, Madam Speaker, I'm speaking on the bill as in its entirety. It was brought back
Yes,
to
it
the
was.
session floor. So if I may, I just have a question to ask to ensure that what we received this morning was the amendments intact that we made on Thursday. And I wanted to ask the author of the bill if the section on 32120.1, hazardous pay in support of state emergency in response to novel coronavirus, COVID-19, and going down from 1 all the way down to 2, where it's showing that $150 a month shall be given to the National Guard. Is that still part of the legislation, or that was already taken out?
Vice Speaker, would you like to yield?
Madam Speaker, if you just give me a quick recess.
Sure. We are in a moment's recess. Imina 35 na legislatura ng Guahan is back from recess on the amendment. Senator Tello Titagui on, I understand you have an amendment to proffer.
Sejus Masi, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, after speaking with my colleagues and the author of the amendment, we're going to strike out Section 2. This is, okay, on Section 32120.1. And if you scroll down to the section number 2, any member of the National Guard activated under state active duty, we strike out that whole Section 2, or not section, I'm sorry, number 2, and strike that out. Madam Speaker, most of us thought that this was already taken out on Thursday. And as we reviewed this morning, the legislation, it wasn't taken out. And if anything, Madam Speaker, the $150 a month to the National Guard, most likely, almost guaranteed, this is not refundable through either FEMA or the federal government. So, and then I was also brought to my attention that in situations like this, whenever a guardsman is put into a situation that's hazardous or dangerous, they do have some kind of hazardous pay already given to them. So basically, Madam Speaker, it's just to strike out number 2. And Madam Speaker, this would also be very consistent with the striking out of Section 3, which also talks about the National Guard and hazardous pay.
Thank you. I was just informed by the clerk the sentiments you're sharing right now. So to be clear, I will again accept that amendment to delete section,
Or number 2.
I mean line item 2,
Yes.
sub item 2, starting on page 2, line 25. Are there anyone wishing to speak on that amendment? Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Senator Minority Leader Titagui. Vice Speaker, on the motion to place.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to move Bill number 326-35 as substituted into the third reading voting file.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, no objections, motion carries. Vice 334. Senator Regine Lee. Senator Regine Lee. Because I'm 334. Senator Regine? Colleagues, I was informed by our clerk that we still have 340, 334, and 335 in that perspective on the agenda. Inclusive of 313 and 331. Moment's recess. Y 35 na las Turangahan is back from recess. Senator Lee, I'll recognize you at this time.
Sujus Mahasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to begin by thanking the public, thanking the people of Guam for their understanding and for their patience while we learned more about the governor's plan to begin paying federal stimulus checks with the anticipated war claims reimbursement. This was a policy that was announced while discussions on Measure Bill 340 were set to begin. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, I remain disappointed in the governor's choice of funds for this program, as it would take away the immediate viability of not only Bill 340-35, but also other measures contemplating local economic relief. I'm disappointed, Madam Speaker, that the governor would rather use $11 million to help about 7,000 families instead of the $15 million to help potentially 30,000 families. With that, Madam Speaker, I understand that to the governor, the most fiscally prudent thing to do is to spend money locally that will be reimbursed back to us. And I just want to be clear, it was unclear that this program would be reimbursed. So I do understand that part of the equation. Madam Speaker, after careful deliberation, I still believe that Bill 340 should be considered by this body, because even if funds don't exist for this to be the first local bridge to federal assistance, there may be a point drawn further down the road where our families can't afford to wait for the next wave of help from Washington. So I continue to be grateful to my colleagues for their support of Bill 340. This measure, entitled the Recovery, Income Support, and Empowerment RISE Act of 2020, as this measure aims to send a clear message about legislative priorities during this public health emergency. So for these reasons, Madam Speaker, again, I move to set aside Bill 340-35. Sujus Masi.
Buen provecho, Senator Lee. On the motion to set aside Bill 340-35, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing none. Motion carries. Vice Speaker Nelson,
Madam Speaker,
Majority Leader.
I'd like to make a motion that we recess until tomorrow so our bills can be engrossed and come back for voting at 0900 hours.
On that, we are in recess till 9 o'clock tomorrow.